Okay, so on exercise 219, I want you right now to draw a line at part 3 and cross off part 3 and 4 because you won't have time to do part 3 and 4 today. I optimistically put that in there and then just changed my mind. So we're just doing part 1 and 2. Next class, we'll do part 3 and 4. I'll give you a new handout. It'll be exercise 220. But I want to stop you from worrying about any of that stuff yet. It's very important when we're dealing with renderings in V-Ray and Rhino to learn to cut sections, and I want to give that adequate time. I don't want to rush through it. So we will do a session next class on cutting sections through a relatively simple building that you will build today, and then later on in the semester, right after Thanksgiving break, we'll do a much more complicated section with a lot more going on, and we'll spend 2 days doing that section too. I've found that in previous years, people never quite got the section down. Like, they could kind of do it if I was around, but I really want you guys moving forward to, like, I know how to do the section, it's not a problem, I can do it. So we're going to make sure that you get there, and I was counting out days earlier today, making sure we had enough days to spread things out a little bit and not rush. So we're going to make sure that, and even if we have to shorten something else, I think the sections are too important. So we're going to start today, and I want to talk about cameras and views and saving views and just kind of reinforcing that. I've already discussed it. You've already seen it, but it can't hurt to go through it again to really make sure you're getting that. And then for part 2, it says spend the next 45 minutes. You'll have the rest of the class. What I want you to do is to create a 2-room, we'll call it an oasis. It could be whatever you want it to be, but it needs to be 2 rooms that we're ultimately going to cut a section through. So I want them to be relatively well developed. Attach 2 rooms together, put windows in, put doors in. If you want, find furniture online, put that in. This is a sample building with not too much around it that we're going to practice cutting the sections through. So I want you to have something reasonably detailed, so windows and that sort of thing. Put materials on, put glass on, that kind of thing, so that you have something to work with next class. Design-wise, it makes no difference. There's no design prompt. It's just something that you can cut through. And rather than give you something, it's good practice to model. We're not far away. If I look at my schedule, starting on November 3rd, we'll actually start on the final model for the class. That doesn't mean that it's your final assignment, because there'll be another assignment before the finals due, but we'll actually start modeling that so that as we do interior renderings, exterior renderings, day renderings, night renderings, you're actually working on something that will get you to the end, if that makes sense. So we'll spend a week modeling that and getting ready for it, and then we'll start going through all the rendering settings and that sort of thing. So anyway, it's getting to be the exciting time. I'm still working on the network render. I spent a bunch more time working on it this morning. It will get there by the time you need it. I will work out the kinks so that we'll get some good quality rendering. So let's talk a little bit about cameras and kind of how cameras work. Cameras are rather challenging to really work with in Rhino. The fundamental problem is if you're in a view, you can't see your own camera. So you kind of have this dichotomy of, I have a view that is the camera, but I have to control the camera from a different view. And it makes some sense, because if you think about holding a video camera or thinking about holding a still camera, you are looking through the camera at whatever you're seeing, and you're seeing that photo, but in order to manipulate it, you're stepping outside of the camera itself. So it's a little bit hard to get used to how you have to see it. So generally, we have our top, our front, our right side, and our perspective view. Once we start getting into cameras, usually it's useful to have several different views that are perspective views up at once. So I'm going to open up a few views here. I have my standard perspective, if I can see it, set view. I have my standard perspective, which we can open up. I also can open up, so we have standard perspective. I have perspective 2, which is a saved view that I already created. Let me go to perspective 1 and see if I can get perspective 1's view. So basically what I'm trying to do is create several views of my various objects so that I can work with my cameras in those views. I do like to have one view that's in elevation so that I can deal with heights. So I usually leave a front or a side up as a height. So I'm going to center my work on my, maybe not, hopefully on my building. Let me select my object here. Try this one more time, sorry. Should just click on it there. Alright. Let me zoom, selected. Alright, and I have these two views out, and I have my side view here so that I can see it in all the views. Okay? So sometimes you're going to want, aerial views looking down. That one's pretty easy to set up. You basically move your mouse around, you orbit around the object, you can set up the view. The harder ones are always the street views, the street level perspectives and that sort of thing, because when you are, say, in perspective 2 and you try to adjust it, you end up behind a building and then wait a minute, you can't see it anymore. And so it's a lot harder to manipulate that view. So we're going to try to work on those views. So if I want to work with perspective 2's camera, I can show it in any of the other views by clicking on perspective view, going to set camera, and then show camera should be checked. That being said, once it's checked, in every view except for perspective 2, the camera will be shown. And so to be able to see it a little bit better, I'm going to temporarily turn off the cityscape so that we can actually see the camera. So this is perspective 2's camera, that point there. If we're looking at perspective 1, it's actually a little bit off the side of the page here. Let me see if I can. There it is. I'm just adjusting the views a little bit so we can see a little bit more. There it is there, looking at it. We can see the general frame of what it's looking at. We have some adjustments that can be made. If, for example, I'm in perspective 2 with nothing selected, let me deselect that point. I could, for example, change the lens length here. Let me change it to 28, for example, and watch what happens over here. When I switch to 28, see how the whole triangle gets much wider? So the changes that I make in perspective 2 are going to affect the way the camera looks in the other perspective.
The lens length is basically how wide is the angle?
It's how wide is the angle. Okay. So if you've worked in photography with a camera at all, the lower that number, the wider the angle is going to be. The higher the number, the narrower it's going to be. Generally, shooting photographs of architectural buildings, a 28 is pretty good. An 18 starts to get a little distorted. A 35 is good, but you can't always capture the whole building if it's too big of a building. So you're going to kind of be in the sweet spot somewhere, between 18 and 35. 28 is pretty good. Okay. So that tends to be why I picked that, but you can work with it. So we have different controls. Each of these controls a different part of the camera. If I select on one of these points and I say move, and in this case I'm going to move vertical, you can see that moving the camera in this view here is controlling what the view in the perspective over here is doing. Does that kind of make sense? So you always have to have the view of the camera up so you can see what's actually happening, but at the same time you're doing all the controlling in one of the other views, which is one of the awkward parts about working with cameras. Okay, and it just takes some practice to get used to. So I can manipulate that. These other controls, for example, this I believe will manipulate the lens length of the camera, but it's much harder to work with that. Hold on a second. Back. I think it's this one that manipulates the lens length. Yeah, so this manipulates the lens length, right? So this is getting narrower, more telephoto-like. This is getting wider. We're seeing more.
So it's the same thing you just reset.
It's the same thing I just reset. The difference here is I'm doing this just visually, what looks right, instead of coming over here and being able to actually specify the number of that camera. So right now it's 30.2 because I did it arbitrarily. Yeah. So I can come in and do 28 and make sure I've typed in a number. Just different ways of adjusting it. Doesn't matter which way you do it, but I'm just trying to point that out for you. So once you get the view set the way you want it, so we'll say something like this, I can go ahead and in the view that is actually the camera, I can go ahead and go to set view, I can go to named views, and I can choose to save the view. And I already have, because you guys got this file, I set up a few views for you ahead of time, but I want you to start creating your own. This is something that's very, very important before you start renderings, because you will find in the process of rendering, especially when you get to the final project, you will do a rendering and it's okay, and then you'll learn something different, or you'll tweak something and you say, wait a minute, I need to re-render that. I added some furniture, I changed the windows, I wanted aluminum instead of wood windows, and I want to go back and re-render it. If you have to go back and try to find that view again, it's way more work. So before you do a rendering, I would encourage you to save the view as this is render 1, this is render 2, render 3. You can always go back and re-render that particular view. Likewise, I want a view, I did my render and I want a higher quality, bigger rendering because the final poster is going to be bigger. We can go back and edit that setting, re-render the exact same view. Nothing changes. So it's one of those things that's really important to get in the habit of doing it now. Not that it matters now, but it will matter later on, and if you do it now, you'll get in the habit of it. So I'm going to go ahead and save as, and this time I'm going to call it render 1, and I'll go ahead and say OK. And so that's my first render view. Okay. Now let me go ahead and let me turn on my SF model again so I can kind of look around here a little bit. If we're looking in perspective 1, which I was clearly able to see before, now I'm inside a building, I can't see anything. It's one of the challenges. I have perspective 2 or perspective 1 down here that I can kind of look at. Let's turn off the camera for render 1. So let me turn off the camera. Okay, it disappears from my other views. And let's turn on the perspective view camera. Where am I here? Show camera. There we go. It's going to be a little bit hard to see in this view, so I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that I can see it. And there it is, and lo and behold, it's down inside this building somewhere. Okay. Now, if I'm looking down on the city streets, right, a nice view might be looking in between some buildings. So I look kind of down, and I say, okay, what if I had a view that was looking this way? That's a view I don't have, right, down on the streets over here somewhere, looking toward my building. What I can do, I need this to be outside of the building for just a second. So let me turn this off so I can see it a little bit better. Or actually, better yet, let me switch this view into a ghosted view. Right, so I can kind of see through. Maybe a wireframe would be a little bit easier initially. And I'm going to take this point, which is my camera. It's called the camera point. I'll select it, and I'm going to move it over here somewhere. Okay. Now I turned on vertex snapping because I know that this is a mesh the way it was made out. Notice that when I move it, it's changing this view up here. It's changing the perspective 1 view. I'm going to switch out of wireframe now and into shaded so that I can get a little bit better sense. I want to swing around a little bit further, so we'll swing over more like that. And so we can see that I'm in the perspective view. I'm getting the edge of this building with a little sweep on it. So we're going to keep adjusting a little bit. Maybe I'll tweak this over a little bit more. Right, very easy to get it a little bit too back a little bit. Right, I'm going to have to zoom in. It's this because of how big the city is. It's jumpy, so it's hard to make a good consistent move. Let me move this back a little bit more. I'm going to try to hit a point like right in here somewhere. Okay, that's pretty good. And right now, and remember, since I'm working in this view, let me go ahead and turn this off temporarily so that I can actually do some rotations without lagging too bad. Right, this point is right down on the ground, right, which isn't exactly, I mean, it would be like an ant's view of the building. So I want to move it up to a person's height. So I'll go move, vertical, and we'll go from here, you know, it's up to you, whatever height you want to pick. Usually people pick somewhere 5'8", 5'10", because that's an average height. A lot of times I'll do it for my height. It just, you know, it doesn't really matter. You do it for whatever you want. So we'll do 5'10" for right now, because that's the standard. So it moves up off the ground a little bit. It changes the view a little bit. right? Now I want to adjust, we can zoom out here a little bit. I want to adjust that lens length, which would be this drag, so I could adjust that. Let's see, sorry it's being so laggy. Whether I want it wider or narrower, or hold on, let it finish being laggy. I can go into the view itself, come over to the properties. As long as nothing's selected, I can change the lens length here. So I could say 28 if I wanted it to be 28. And it widens up to where I am. Okay? So once I kind of like this view, I'll go ahead and click on the little triangle and go to, maybe not. I'll go to Set View, Named Views. And I'm going to save this, and we'll save it as Render 2. I'll go ahead and say OK. And so what I want you to do in the first part, in part 1 of your exercise today, by the way, this should be the one that already has the HDRI file. It's all, we've got the materials and whatever. We're just working with the views today, right? I want you to set up 3 of these different views. I would try to pick, instead of doing the easy ones that are the sky views looking down, try to work and manipulate with the camera for the practice of getting down at eye level and looking up at these buildings. Because it's more work, it's a little bit harder, but you'll understand the camera a lot better if you do that. Once you're there, you'll go ahead and go into the rendering options. If you click on O, don't forget you can enable network rendering. I can't make promises that it's going to work perfectly, but at least it's worth a shot. If you're getting little black squares, then we'll try to disable it and tweak it a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and go to System here. I'm going to check to make sure that distributed rendering is on. I'm going to click on the 3 dots for my hosts, and I'll click on Find Servers, and let's see if it finds any for me. All right. The other thing that has happened, now there's 8, that's good. Let's resolve those servers, and we'll check them to turn them on to let my renderings work. Computers haven't necessarily been restarted. People have turned off the render spawners. I will turn on, or I'll go around and try to turn on any of the computers that are off and see if we can get them to come back on with the render spawners. So I'll go ahead and say OK. Those spawners are ready. The other factor here is under output. The default width and height are 800 by 600. All of these presets don't match the actual view that you're looking at. So if you want your final rendered image to show exactly what it is on the screen, okay, in this viewport, see how it's a little bit wide? Okay? If I want that exact rendering and I don't want things cut out, I can click on this Get View Aspect button. And when I click on Get View Aspect, it changes the image aspect ratio. See, it's 1.99 now, right? Which matches the view that I'm looking at. At that point, I can click this little L button. Maybe. We'll wait. I can click this little L button, which will lock it so that I can't change it. And then when I edit one of these numbers, or I pick one of these presets, so let's say I did a width of 1,000, right? It will update my height to mesh, and it will always stay in that ratio, which means what you render will always be the view that I have set up. Right? Now, sometimes you want to tweak it so that you're rendering taller than the view because you want more of the skyscraper. It's a little bit different scenario in terms of changing it because you don't want to do this. But in this case, I'm going to do it, and you can keep bumping up. You know, as I switch to 1280 here, the height automatically adjusts to 640 for me. So anyway, that's all set and ready to go. Once that's ready to go, I'll go ahead and do my render, and we'll cross our fingers that it'll actually work. What you will do today is you'll get these 3 views set up, you'll save each of your views, then you'll start the rendering process, right? Render it in a reasonably high quality, right? While it's picking up the spawners and doing this render, go ahead and move on. Don't go from within Rhino file open or file new. Open a brand new Rhino, right, on the computer, and we'll say new, large object inches, and start modeling part 2, right? So you can have the renders running in the background while you start on that 2-room little house. I have one that I did last class or last year that I'm going to open up just so you kind of get a sense for what I'm talking about. So let me go to File. I think it's already open here. Nope, it's not. Let me go to File, Open. And of course, computers run a little bit slower when you have a rendering in the background, so be patient. You know, I will probably embellish this a little bit, but I want you to have a sense for what I'm after. Okay? Simple, right? It's got a little balcony here. You can tell that it's going to make a reasonably good section. There's some window slits that are going to cast shadows on the inside. I have some doors here that we can see in elevation. I probably need some furniture inside here. It's not particularly exciting or attractive or anything else, but it will serve really nicely for cutting a section, right? We have a nice solid wall that we'll cut through. We have a nice solid base. I put in a little bit of terrain here. Doesn't really matter what the terrain is, but it gave me something to cut through as part of the section. So I'm trying to have about that much, right? Maybe I'll put in a little bit more furniture. Maybe I'll add a little bit of a parapet on top of the roof so we get a little bit more detail. Depends on how much time you have, but that's what I'm going after. Not something extravagant, just something that we can work with. Does that make sense? In terms of what you're after? Okay, so I will let you do the renderings, and I'll let you get started on part 2. Please finish this before next class, because I don't want you wasting time modeling next class. I want to concentrate on the section and understanding how that part of it works, right? So it should be completely done by next class. Do put in the HDRI background image. Do put in a sun. You know, basically do everything we've been talking about. Put the materials in. You'll have time. You'll probably have, 2 hours to work on that by the time you're done with your camera settings and I'm done talking. Okay? So I'll turn you loose.